The intensive care unit was full of sounds that had nothing to do with comfort. A monitor pulsed in steady intervals. A ventilator pushed air with mechanical patience. Somewhere above the bed, a drip released liquid 1 drop at a time, as if even medicine had learned to move carefully around suffering. Under the cold white light, Vivian Sterling lay motionless beneath a thin hospital blanket, her face almost colorless, her body still in a way that made strangers lower their voices without being asked. She looked absent. That was the lie the room told everyone. At the doorway stood her husband, Nathan Cole. He did not rush to her side. He paused first, one hand resting lightly against the frame, his eyes moving with quiet precision across the machines, the corners of the room, the narrow glass panel in the door, and the reflection of the hallway beyond it. He was not gathering courage. He was checking for witnesses. Before we go further, tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Then he stepped into the room and let the door ease shut behind him. Vivian heard everything. The soft click of the latch, the measured sound of his shoes against the polished floor, the whisper of his sleeve as he adjusted his cuff. Inside the prison of her body, panic rose with such force it seemed impossible that it could remain trapped. She tried to open her eyes, tried to move her hand, tried to force even one sound through her throat. Nothing answered her. Her mind was awake. Her body was stone. Nathan stopped beside the bed and looked down at her with an expression anyone else would have mistaken for devastation. His features were controlled in the polished way grief is controlled when it is being performed. His mouth was solemn, his posture respectful, his silence almost elegant. But there was no sorrow coming off him, only calculation. He leaned closer until she could feel the warmth of his breath near her temple. "I did give you a chance," he whispered. The words slid into her like ice. Not, "I love you." Not, "Please wake up." Not, "Stay with me." "I did give you a chance." He straightened slightly, and then she heard a small sound near the machine at her side. Plastic against plastic, a hand testing something, a cord being touched. Terror tore through her. "No, no, please, no." She screamed it inside herself with everything still alive in her. But the scream hit the walls of her body and died there. Her lips remained parted only by the ventilator tube. Her fingers stayed still on the sheet. Her chest rose only because the machine made it rise. Nathan hesitated. Just 1 second. Then footsteps passed in the corridor. He withdrew at once. By the time the door opened and a nurse entered carrying fresh medication, he had transformed. His shoulders had softened. His face had fallen into grief so convincing it might have fooled heaven itself. "Any change?" he asked in a low voice. The nurse shook her head gently. "Not yet, Mr. Cole." He nodded and touched Vivian's hand with practiced tenderness. To the nurse, he looked like a broken husband refusing to abandon hope. To Vivian, he felt like a man standing beside an open grave, wondering how much longer he had to wait. And in that silent, terrible moment, pinned inside her own unmoving body, Vivian understood something that changed the meaning of everything she had believed about her marriage. Nathan was not waiting for her to recover. Nathan was waiting for her to disappear. 13 days earlier. 13 days earlier, Vivian Sterling had not been lying under hospital lights with tubes in her throat and fear in her veins. She had been seated at the head of a long walnut conference table on the top floor of a glass tower, reviewing expansion documents while rain gathered over the skyline beyond her office windows. At 36, Vivian was one of the richest women in the country. Very few people knew it. The public recognized the names of her companies, but not the architecture behind them. Most of her holdings sat behind layered entities, staggered trusts, private boards, and controlled investment structures designed to keep attention away from her while power moved exactly where she wanted it to move. She owned medical technology firms, regional logistics corridors, rehabilitation centers, private housing groups, and a chain of quiet investments so deeply integrated into daily life that people used her systems without ever knowing her name. She did not collect attention. She collected leverage. She did not waste energy proving herself to rooms built on vanity. She preferred results. In business, she was admired, feared, and almost impossible to read. She listened longer than most people could tolerate. She remembered details no one else thought mattered. She had the rare ability to make a person feel fully heard while deciding at the same time whether they would ever be allowed near her again. And yet, for all her discipline, there remained a private softness she showed almost no one. She wanted love. Not admiration dressed as romance. Not fascination with wealth. Not that bright counterfeit affection money attracts from people who can smell opportunity before they can name it. She wanted to be chosen without her fortune standing in the room beside her. She wanted someone to love the woman, not the empire. That longing, hidden even from herself most days, was the one weakness Nathan Cole knew how to find. She met him 2 years earlier at a fundraising dinner for a children's recovery foundation. The event had taken place in an old conservatory hall, lit by chandeliers and candlelight, the kind of place where people smiled too carefully and introduced themselves by surname first, as if family history were a title. Vivian had attended reluctantly. She disliked social charity circles because so many people used compassion as decoration. That evening, she had dressed simply and introduced herself only as an advisor working in health strategy. No company names, no mention of ownership. No hint that a large portion of the room's donations had been routed, directly or indirectly, through structures she controlled. Nathan approached her near the end of the night. He was handsome in a polished, intelligent way, not loud, not flashy. His confidence was controlled enough to feel safe. He didn't open with praise. He opened with a question about one of the speakers and whether Vivian believed the foundation's outreach model was sustainable. She answered honestly. He listened. Actually listened. When she challenged the panel's shallow understanding of long-term rehabilitation care, Nathan smiled with the kind of quiet admiration that feels personal because it does not ask to be noticed. "You're the only person here talking like outcomes matter more than applause," he said. It was a simple sentence, maybe even rehearsed, but it landed exactly where it needed to. Over the following weeks, he moved carefully. He never flooded her with attention. He gave just enough. Thoughtful messages, perfectly timed calls, details remembered from old conversations. Once, he sent her a first-edition copy of a novel she had mentioned loving as a student. Another time, he brought her white orchids because she had once said she preferred flowers that looked calm instead of romantic. Everything about him felt precise. And because Vivian had spent so much of her life surrounded by people who wanted access, she mistook precision for sincerity. So she did something no one in her legal or security circle would have approved of. She hid the scale of who she was. Around Nathan, she drove ordinary cars. She let him see curated pieces of her world, but kept the true machinery of her fortune behind locked corporate walls. She wanted the answer to one dangerous question. Could a man love her if he believed she was simply successful, not extraordinary? For a while, she thought the answer was yes. Nathan was attentive without being clingy. He was affectionate without becoming careless. He checked on her after long meetings. He brought her tea when she worked late. He remembered names, dates, moods, and silences. He made her feel seen, in the private, almost unbearable way lonely people dream of being seen. When she married him, she did not think she was making a foolish decision. She thought she was finally allowing herself a human one. What she did not understand was that Nathan had loved many things about her from the beginning. Trust was not one of them. Long before Vivian, Nathan had built his life around one private humiliation. He could charm his way into rooms. He could not inherit them. He had grown up respectable, educated, and permanently adjacent to power. Close enough to study it, never close enough to belong to it. He learned early that influence moved differently around old names, old wealth, and private institutions. Some people walked through life with invisible doors opening for them before they even arrived. Nathan hated those people, with a quietness so refined it often disguised itself as admiration. He studied them, the schools they praised, the watches they wore, the posture of men accustomed to being deferred to, the soft, careless confidence of women who had never once doubted that the world would make room for them. He built himself accordingly. Charm over resentment, elegance over hunger, composure over envy. When he first met Vivian, he believed he had found a brilliant woman with strong professional connections and comfortable success. Valuable, certainly. Attractive, absolutely. But manageable. Then he began noticing fractures in the story she told him. Executives 10 years older treated her with subtle deference. Powerful board members answered her calls too quickly. People with genuine influence knew her without introductions. She could disappear for a day, and somehow entire negotiations shifted. She spoke rarely about money, but understood power with the ease of someone who had never had to chase it. Nathan noticed everything. At first, curiosity sharpened his attention. Eventually, suspicion became obsession. After the wedding, his questions began softly. Questions about the structure of holding companies. Questions about family inheritance law. Questions about private trusts and incapacitation clauses. Questions about why certain older investors seemed unusually careful around her. Questions that sounded harmless if they came one at a time. But they kept coming. Vivian answered lightly at first, then more vaguely, then not at all. She saw the pattern, but love has a cruel habit of making intelligent people negotiate with their own instincts. She told herself he was ambitious, not dangerous. Curious, not invasive. Restless, not predatory. Then came Celeste Vaughn. Everything that followed darkened after Nathan met her. Celeste belonged to the world Nathan had spent his whole life trying to enter. Her family's money was old enough to be spoken of in lowered voices. She had grown up among private clubs, inheritance attorneys, political dinners, and country estates where power was never announced because it never had to be. She was beautiful, yes. But more importantly, she was fluent in the exact social language Nathan worshipped. They met at a winter arts gala where Vivian had been drawn into a policy conversation across the room. Celeste noticed Nathan first. Nathan responded faster. Their first exchange lasted less than 3 minutes, but it opened a door greed had been knocking on for years. Celeste found him charming. Nathan found her useful. Attraction entered later, but ambition was there at once. Their affair grew in shadows. Private lunches under professional excuses. Late-night calls when Vivian was working. Messages deleted almost as soon as they were read. A hand on the back at a crowded reception. Too much familiarity and brief eye contact. Too much comfort in silence. Celeste gave Nathan what Vivian never had, a feeling of social arrival. Nathan gave Celeste what she found equally intoxicating, a man willing to gamble morality for a cent. Then fate delivered something even more dangerous than temptation. Opportunity. The accident happened on a Thursday night heavy with rain. Vivian had just left a closed meeting at one of the rehabilitation institutes quietly connected to her medical group. The conversation had run late. Regulatory shifts, equipment procurement, staffing models, acquisition concerns. By the time she entered the back of the car, the roads were slick black mirrors under the storm. Her driver, Owen, was careful and experienced. He had worked security contracts before entering her transport rotation. He did not speed. He did not take risks. They were crossing a broad, elevated roadway when headlights appeared too fast in the lane beside them. A large delivery truck shifted sharply. Owen reacted instantly, jerking the wheel to avoid impact. The car lost traction. Metal screamed. Glass burst inward. Vivian's body slammed sideways as the vehicle spun and struck the barrier. The world became light, impact, noise, and then almost nothing. When emergency crews pulled her from the wreckage, she was unconscious and barely breathing. Owen survived with multiple injuries. Vivian was taken into emergency surgery under critical conditions. By the time Nathan arrived at the hospital, he already understood 2 things. First, the situation was severe enough to inspire sympathy. Second, uncertainty was a kind of doorway. He entered the ICU like a husband split open by grief. He thanked the surgeons. He sat at her bedside. He asked all the correct questions in all the correct tones. He held her hand when staff were present. He stayed late enough to be admired. He played love beautifully. But behind the performance, another mind was working. Authority, medical discretion, emergency access, marital rights, asset exposure. What Nathan did not know, what no one knew in those first awful days, was that Vivian had not vanished inside the damage. She was still there. She returned to consciousness slowly, through sound before light, awareness before memory. At first, the world was only fragments, beeping, hissing air, distant voices, the press of immobility so complete it felt unreal. She tried to move and found nothing waiting for her. Tried to open her eyes and discovered darkness held from the inside. Tried to speak and understood with animal terror that even panic had nowhere to go. Days passed, or hours. Time became shapeless. Doctors discussed swelling. Nurses adjusted medication. Machines kept count of things her body could no longer express on its own. And Nathan came and went. Sometimes he sat in silence beside her, performing devotion in case anyone entered. Sometimes he took calls in a lowered voice, far enough from the bed to think himself safe. He was wrong. Vivian could hear everything. One evening, his phone rang while he stood near the window. He answered quietly. "Not now." A woman's voice came through faintly, irritated and intimate. "You keep saying not now." Celeste. Vivian knew the voice at once. Nathan exhaled. "I'm at the hospital." "And?" Celeste said. "How long are we supposed to live like we're waiting in a hallway?" His answer came after a pause. "Until this is finished." The sentence sliced through Vivian with a clarity worse than pain. The next day, she heard him speaking to an administrator in careful tones about treatment burden and quality of life. Later, she heard that a specialist consult one of her own private physicians had requested was being delayed. Another day, she heard Nathan inquire about what permissions might be granted if her condition remained unchanged. Then Celeste came to the hospital. Vivian knew before she heard her because she smelled her first. Expensive perfume, sharp and cold. Then heels. Then laughter too quiet to be innocent. "She really can't hear anything?" Celeste asked. Nathan's voice lowered. "Keep your voice down." "For what? She's gone, Nathan. Everyone can see that." Gone. Vivian raged so hard inside herself she thought the monitors must reveal it. Celeste moved closer to the bed. "You said once this ended you'd stop living half a life." Nathan did not answer immediately. Then he said something Vivian would replay in her mind for weeks. "I won't leave empty-handed." That was the moment grief changed shape inside her. It stopped being only heartbreak. It became understanding. Nathan had discovered enough about her hidden world to become dangerous. Maybe not everything, maybe not the true depth of it, but enough to know he had married far more than the woman he thought he was charming. Enough to believe death might make him rich. The person who saved her was not family. It was Dr. Elias Ward. Elias had served as Vivian's private physician for years, and, more importantly, was one of the rare people she trusted without negotiation. He understood how disciplined she was, how physically resilient, how unlikely she was to surrender without a fight. As the days passed, something about the clinical picture unsettled him. Tiny inconsistencies, micro-responses too purposeful to dismiss, patterns in autonomic reaction that did not fit total absence. On the 7th day after the crash, he entered her room alone late in the afternoon. He sat beside the bed and took her hand. "If you can hear me," he said quietly, "I need you to try." Nothing. He stayed still. Then, after a long and terrible pause, her left ring finger twitched. Elias leaned forward immediately. "If that was you, do it again." Several seconds passed. Then another movement. Small, weak, unmistakable. He did not call the nurses in. He did not announce anything. He understood at once that awareness, in the wrong hands, could become vulnerability. So he became careful. Over the next 2 days, under the cover of legitimate assessments, he documented response patterns, eye activity, intentional reflex behavior, and probable locked-in awareness. He reviewed the treatment record and noted questionable delays. He saw that a recommended neurological consultation had indeed been canceled under spousal pressure. He watched Nathan's behavior and found it too polished, too interested in procedure, too attentive to legal phrasing. He knew enough. Within 48 hours, Vivian was transferred, under strict confidentiality, to a specialist neuro-recovery facility held quietly beneath a corporate network Nathan did not realize she controlled. Officially, it was a medical decision. Unofficially, it was extraction. Nathan accepted the transfer because it fit the story he wanted. He believed she was being moved into prolonged decline, somewhere private enough to disappear respectfully. He had no idea recovery had already begun. It did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like warfare. First came communication through blink patterns. 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Then eye-tracking boards. Then exhausting attempts at finger control. Then an assisted speech device she could use for short phrases after agonizing effort. The first full sentence Vivian managed to type took nearly 10 minutes. "Do not tell my husband I am awake." Elias read it once, then again. He did not ask for explanations immediately. He only nodded. From there, truth came in fragments. The affair. The hospital conversations. The treatment interference. The whispered threat beside the life support machine. Elias listened in total silence until the full shape of betrayal stood between them. Then Vivian asked for her attorney. Within a day, her chief legal counsel arrived under confidentiality protocols. Then came her internal forensic accountant, cybersecurity specialists, and 2 executives who oversaw the hidden structures Nathan had been trying to sniff out without ever reaching their center. Vivian could barely stand. Her voice, when it returned, came as a rough whisper dragged over broken glass. But from a private rehabilitation suite, half paralyzed and still healing, she began directing the demolition of her husband's future. The investigation exposed more than even she had expected. Nathan had been moving the entire time. While posing as a devoted spouse, he had reached out to legal intermediaries about incapacity powers. He had attempted to access dormant corporate layers that were, fortunately for him, designed as decoys. He had initiated informal conversations about trust control and emergency spousal rights. He had signed preliminary requests he was never authorized to sign. Most of it had failed. But failure did not erase intent. It preserved it. The financial team uncovered indirect gifts and transfers connected to Celeste. Hotel reservations hidden beneath consulting invoices. Travel expenditures routed through a boutique advisory firm linked to her social network. Deleted messages recovered from cloud backups Nathan did not know existed. Those messages were devastating. Celeste urged him not to lose nerve. Nathan promised that, once everything settles, they would have access, status, and freedom. They discussed timing, appearances, public sympathy, the inconvenience of waiting. There was no message that conclusively tied either of them to causing the crash. But there were enough suspicious exchanges before the accident to stain coincidence itself. Owen, the driver, recovered enough to speak privately. He told investigators that, in the days leading up to the crash, he had twice noticed the same dark vehicle lingering behind them longer than chance should allow. He could not prove anything. He had no plate, no identity, only a memory that had begun to trouble him after the wreck. Vivian absorbed every detail without visible collapse. She did not cry in front of her team. She did not scream. She did not even curse Nathan's name. She asked for verification, timelines, bank traces, phone records, duplicate confirmations. Pain had taught her precision. Her legal team suggested a clean solution. Freeze his access. File privately. End the marriage quietly. Destroy him without spectacle. Vivian refused. A quiet ending would protect her. It would not reveal him. Nathan had built his entire life on appearances. He could survive scandal if the scandal stayed vague enough. He could reshape himself into a victim, a misunderstood widower, a man unfairly accused by a difficult wife. He would find another woman, another circle, another ladder. No. Vivian wanted truth to arrive in public. Not because she loved revenge more than peace, because men like Nathan depended on secrecy the way fire depends on air. So she designed something colder than rage. She designed exposure. As her recovery strengthened and she learned to stand without support for short stretches, Nathan moved deeper into the fantasy of his own ascent. His relationship with Celeste grew bolder. They began appearing together at select events. Never too obvious at first, then gradually less careful. Rumors moved through social circles with the speed reserved for expensive disgrace. Some people pretended to be shocked. Others excused him with the laziness society often extends to polished men. Grief is complex. Life goes on. He deserves happiness. Celeste, meanwhile, wore triumph beautifully. She behaved like a woman stepping into a future she had already furnished in her head. That was when Vivian's team released a whisper into the right corridors. Not about her recovery, about an engagement. It spread exactly as intended. Within weeks, Nathan and Celeste made it official. Their wedding would be small, refined, and private enough to appear tasteful. A chapel ceremony, followed by an invitation-only reception among the very people whose approval Nathan had spent years trying to earn. He thought he was finally arriving. He did not understand he had been invited onto a stage Vivian built for his ruin. In the final week before the wedding, every moving piece locked into place. Emergency account restrictions were queued to activate. Fraud complaints were prepared. Civil filings were sealed. Authorities reviewed documentary evidence of unauthorized access attempts and medical interference. A court officer was assigned. Selected observers, including 2 journalists known for accuracy rather than scandal, were positioned through legitimate channels. Elias checked Vivian's vitals more than once and warned her against overexertion. "You do not need to appear in person," he told her the night before the ceremony. She stood before a mirror in a quiet suite, one hand lightly resting against the dressing table for balance. She had grown thinner. Recovery had sharpened her face, but her eyes were clearer than they had been in years. "Yes," she said softly. "I do." He studied her for a long moment. "Then promise me, if you feel faint, you stop." A small smile touched her mouth. "I can promise to remain standing long enough." The wedding day arrived bright and deceptively gentle. The chapel was full of stained glass, white flowers, polished wood, and murmuring wealth. Guests entered in immaculate tailoring, wearing the careful expressions people wear when they want to witness scandal while pretending they came for love. Nathan stood at the altar in a cream suit so perfectly cut it seemed designed to erase every ordinary part of his past. Celeste entered later in silk and quiet diamonds, smiling with the serene confidence of a woman who believed history had chosen her. The ceremony began. Faith, commitment, honor. Words neither of them deserved. As vows approached, Nathan's phone vibrated in his pocket. Once, then again, then again. He ignored it. He assumed it was nothing urgent. He did not know his personal accounts were freezing. He did not know formal notices had been delivered to his attorney. He did not know the walls of the life he had been building were already giving way. Then the officiant reached the oldest line in the ceremony. "If anyone objects to this union," he said, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The chapel doors opened. Conversation died. Time itself seemed to hesitate. Vivian Sterling walked in, alive, composed, dressed in ivory, but not as a bride. Her suit was sharp, restrained, and devastatingly elegant. She did not enter like a woman returned from death to beg for justice. She entered like justice that had finally decided to wear a human face. At her side walked Dr. Elias Ward. A few steps behind them came her attorney, a court officer, and 2 investigators carrying sealed files. Gasps broke across the chapel like glass under pressure. Celeste lost color so quickly it looked painful. Nathan turned and went absolutely still. Not shocked, terrified. Vivian did not hurry. She moved down the aisle with measured grace, each step deliberate, the room bending around her in stunned silence. When she stopped near the center, she looked directly at Nathan. "Hello, husband," she said. Her voice was calm. That calmness frightened the room more than anger would have. Nathan swallowed hard. "Vivian, you seem surprised," she said. No one moved. No one even pretended to. The officiant lowered his book. Celeste's fingers tightened around her bouquet so hard, several petals dropped soundlessly to the floor. Vivian took one more step. "You were told," she said, "that I would not wake, that I would not speak, that I would not remember." She held Nathan's gaze without mercy. "But I heard everything." The sentence landed like a blow. Nathan descended one step from the altar. "You don't understand what happened. You were injured. You—" "No," Vivian said softly. "I understand perfectly." Her attorney signaled the court officer, who approached with formal documents. The rustle of paper in that silent chapel sounded louder than prayer. Vivian continued. "I heard you discussing my treatment while I lay unable to move. I heard you ask how soon authority over my affairs could shift. I heard you beside my bed, speaking about what would happen when this was over." Her eyes moved briefly to Celeste. "And I heard her in my hospital room, asking if I was already gone." Celeste found her voice first. "That is not true." Vivian turned toward her with a stillness so absolute it almost felt kind. "Would you like me to repeat the date of your first hospital visit?" she asked. "Or the exact words you used when you told him not to leave empty-handed?" Celeste's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Nathan tried again. "This is not the place for truth?" Vivian asked. The court officer stepped forward. "Mr. Cole, you are being served in connection with fraudulent access attempts, unlawful financial interference, and documented medical decision manipulation, pending formal review." A murmur broke loose among the guests. Phones appeared in trembling hands. Several people lowered them again when they recognized the investigators and realized this was not gossip. This was evidence. Nathan's face changed by the second. Shock, denial, calculation, rage. Then the first visible crack of fear that could no longer be hidden by charm. "This is insane," he snapped. "She's twisting everything." Vivian's attorney spoke clearly into the charged silence, outlining unauthorized inquiries, falsified preliminary requests, suspicious transfers, and preserved communications. Nothing was exaggerated. That made it worse. Each fact arrived cleanly. Each one cut deeper. Celeste stepped back from Nathan, not out of morality, out of survival. "You told me everything was handled," she whispered. And in that instant, every guest understood the truth of her involvement without needing another word. Nathan turned toward her in disbelief, as if betrayal had somehow become unbearable only when it reached him. Vivian watched them both with the terrible steadiness of someone who had suffered long enough to become patient. "This was what you wanted, wasn't it?" she said quietly. "The room, the audience, the approval. You spent so much of your life trying to stand among people who would never mistake you for one of them. And now, they know exactly who you are." Nathan looked around the chapel then, perhaps for the first time, and saw not admiration, not envy, not opportunity, only witness. His phone rang again in his pocket. He did not answer. He already knew. Whatever future he had built was collapsing faster than he could lie. Celeste let her bouquet fall. One of the reporters near the back lowered her gaze briefly, not in pity, but in recognition that a performance had ended, and something irreversible had begun. Nathan made one last attempt to recover himself. "Vivian," he said, lowering his voice as though tenderness might still save him. "Whatever you think you heard, I stayed with you. I was there every day." Vivian's eyes did not soften. "Yes," she said, "you were there." Then, after a beat that seemed to strip him bare in front of everyone, she added, "That is what makes it unforgivable." No one came to his defense. Not one voice. Not one hand. Not even Celeste, who took another step away from him as if shame were contagious and distance might save her reputation. The chapel that had been prepared for vows became a chamber of silence. Nathan looked suddenly small inside it. For a man who had built himself so carefully, it was almost shocking how quickly truth reduced him. Vivian turned to leave before the room could become messy with argument. She had not come for chaos. She had come for revelation, and revelation had already done its work. As she passed Nathan, he said her name one final time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just once. She paused without facing him. "When I was lying in that room," she said, "do you know what hurt most?" He said nothing. "It was not the affair. It was not the greed. It was realizing that the man I loved was most honest only when he believed I could never answer him." Then she walked on. Elias moved beside her. The investigators followed. Behind them, the chapel remained full of flowers, stained glass, wealth, and stunned faces. But whatever had been gathered there for marriage was dead now. Nathan did not chase her. He could not. By the time the authorities finished with the documents in his hand, even he understood that some endings do not leave enough of a person behind to run. That night, long after statements had been taken, and calls had been made, and the world had begun feeding greedily on the scandal of the day, Vivian asked Elias to take her back to the hospital. Not to the rehabilitation facility, to the original ICU. The room was empty now. No ventilator, no medication tray, no husband by the door performing grief. Only dim light, polished floors, and the faint, sterile chill of a place where people had waited between worlds. Vivian stood just inside the doorway and listened. For a moment she could still hear it all. The monitor, the hiss of forced air, Nathan's whisper in the dark. "I did give you a chance." She walked slowly to the bed that had once held her like a coffin and rested her fingertips on the rail. Elias remained near the door, giving her silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it no longer sounded trapped. "I thought this room was where my life ended," she said. He looked at her gently. "And now?" Vivian let the silence settle one moment longer. Then she turned toward the dark window, where only her own reflection looked back at her. "Now I know," she said. "It was where I heard the truth for the first time." Outside the room, somewhere farther down the corridor, another monitor began to beep in slow, stubborn rhythm. Life, still refusing to leave quietly. And this time, Vivian Sterling did not hear it as a warning. She heard it as proof that even after betrayal, after terror, after the body becomes a prison and love becomes a weapon, a heart can still remain. Not innocent, not unchanged, but alive. Before we say goodbye, take a moment to think about Vivian's story. Sometimes the people we trust most can hurt us in ways we never imagined. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people we welcomed into our hearts. But Vivian's story is also a reminder that strength is not about never falling. Strength is about rising after life gives you every reason to stay down. She lost her trust. She lost her peace. She almost lost her life. Yet she refused to lose herself. And perhaps that is the greatest victory of all. If this story touched your heart, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever seen someone overcome betrayal with courage and dignity like Vivian did? Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need this message, and subscribe to African Souls Tales for more powerful stories about love, betrayal, resilience, humanity, and life's deepest lessons. I'm Adrian. And remember, the truth may be delayed, but it has a way of finding the light. Until next time, choose wisdom, choose courage, and never underestimate the strength of a faithful heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.